Hello, all of you fellow fans of Christopher Manson's Maze. This is Bill M. back with another Maze commentary number 24. In this one, I want to talk about something that many fans of Maze have tried, including myself, when they get to kind of a point of frustration, and that is attempting to map the rooms of Maze. A quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about. We're going to address the question, why map Christopher Manson's Maze in the first place? Why are we going to do such a thing? For that matter, why do we do it with other games? And I'm going to talk about mapping systems in general that have been used, and a little quick crash course on a thing called graph theory. I'm going to address the difficulties in mapping Maze in particular that maybe some other games don't really have as much of a problem with. And I'm going to offer some suggestions on mapping with Maze. Also going to offer my praises and criticisms of the maps of Maze you can find on IntoTheAbyss.net. And finally going to offer some of my own maps. These are works in progress, but I'll show them to you when the time comes. In the meantime, please give this clip a like if you haven't yet. Maybe even subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. Let's begin. So why would we attempt to map Maze? Well, let's take a step back and look at Maze in general and then in puzzles in general. A reminder that I've had, and there are certain people out there who don't like to hear this, but they have to hear this. Maze, as a reminder, is not a puzzle for the impatient. It's not for people expecting a total left brain method kind of solution. It's not Sudoku. And like any challenges, it's gonna require some time. Not to mention, in the case of Maze, some right brain thinking, as well as the left brain thinking. Now, puzzles and games in general, why do we have them? I would argue we have them for our entertainment. That's ultimately what it comes down to. We want to flex our brain. But puzzles need the right amount of difficulty. If a puzzle is too easy, well, that's going to be boring, not really a challenge. On the other hand, if it's too challenging to the point where it seems hopeless to try to find any kind of solution, well, that's going to get overly frustrating, and that's not going to be fun either. Now, fortunately with Maze, when something's come too hard, you can always switch to another aspect of it, because there are multiple things to find out about Maze. There is, of course, the general challenge of trying to find the shortest path, and then trying to find the riddle and the answer to the riddle. But there are lots of different things in every single room you can explore. So if you get too frustrated trying to figure out one room, you can think, okay, let me put that aside and let me try another room, or let me focus on the riddle. Or if you've been focusing too long on the riddle, maybe I can put that aside and focus back on the rooms, and so on. It's what keeps the book interesting, at least for me. But whether it's Maze or some other puzzle or game, sometimes when you get stuck for too long, you may resort to cheating. You may resort to a little hint just to resume the entertainment. Like if you're playing one of those mobile games and it's like, okay, I've been on this level forever, but for 99 cents I can get a booster, and let me do that, and then the game will be fun again. Or in the case of Maze, here I am making clips and you're watching them, so maybe you're looking for some insight on Maze. Not to completely cheat and find the answers. Maybe some of you are, but, at least get rid of some of that frustration. So many readers, in wanting to learn about Maze and or wanting to keep track of the paths, do end up mapping the rooms. You're going through the book and realize, okay, I've been through this room before and it seems I'm kind of going on in circles. Let me take out a piece of paper. Let me try mapping what's there. Maybe I can get a better view of things that way. And some people have not necessarily drawn a map in terms of a picture. Maybe they've written out the exits. I've done this before, as I'm trying to solve things in Maze. Okay, these are the exits in room 1. These are the exits in room 2. And let me write them all down. Or vice versa. Let's find all the rooms in Maze that have a door to room 1. And then to room 2, and so on. And maybe if we spend half an hour, writing this down, this might give us some insight. But, a visual aid would be nice, and that's where we get into maps. Before I get into talking about maps for the book Maze, I want to talk about maps a little more in general, and some maps that I used in a prior game. So back in the 1980s, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with this game series called Zork. And it was made by this company called Infocom from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they made what are called text-based adventures. So no graphics, but you would play on your computer and it would say, okay, you're in this room, give a description of the room. What do you want to do? And you would type complete sentences. Okay, pick up the sword, kill the troll, go west, or abbreviations for actions, like W, just typing that to go west. Kind of Dungeons and Dragons based, but they had lots of other games from the same company, not on that theme, but other themes too. You would navigate rooms and solve puzzles. And I had this as a kid, and I was completely frustrated with it because it seemed I wasn't really getting much of anywhere. And what I didn't know is that there were maps and hint booklets you could purchase for an additional price. These were called Invisiclues. You're supposed to only use these as a last resort, but there was a way to do it. And I remember reading in the instructions, hey, if you're getting stuck, why not try drawing a map? So I tried drawing a map, but with just text to go on, it was sort of like, well, how do I draw this? Okay, there's a house with a mailbox. Let's draw that. Then next to that is a clearing. All right, let's draw like a tree here. There's another clearing. Well, let's draw another tree here, forest, and okay, this map is kind of looking all the same, not really telling me anything. So I forgot about the game for a while, but then in 6th grade, I was on the school bus, and my friend Brian happened to have a map for one of the Zork games. And I looked at it, and like I wouldn't say simplicity of it, but kind of the layout of it hit me. Like, you can think of it as little separate rooms, and to go from one room to another, you draw a line to it. Wow. This simplifies everything so much, and it doesn't look like this little picture I drew where I was trying to draw parts of a forest next to a house and everything. So it was looking at that map that actually got me finally interested in Zork. I realized, okay, there is some kind of strategy here. There is some kind of way of winning, it would seem. So in this example that you can see here on the right, this is a map from Zork 3, third game in the series. And if we zoom in on one section here on the lower right, you can see, okay, there's this area called Barren Area. And there's a line going up and to the right into this other place called Hairpin Loop. So in the game, if you were in Barren Area, you would go northwest and you would arrive in Hairpin Loop. And then from there, you can go southwest, down to the left, get to Cliff Edge. But some exits were also one-way, and those were shown on the map by an arrow, as you can see in the legend. So if instead Barren Area, we go west to the cliff, and there's a little D there for down. If we go down from the cliff, it's a one-way trip to the cliff ledge. In the game, if you try going up from there, it will say something like, well, it's too steep and you can't climb up, or you can't get a good footing, or whatever. So this whole kind of mapping system that was used with the Infocom games, at least with their little cheat maps, is something we will take a look at in more detail as it applies to Maze in a minute. That whole process, though, of little boxes and lines connecting them is a whole branch of mathematics actually called graph theory. Now, I know math, the M word, scares a lot of people, but stay with me on this one. It's actually not all that complicated. If we look at the Wikipedia definition of graph theory, they say, graph theory is the study of graphs, which are mathematical structures used to model pairwise relations between objects. Well, a graph means two different things in mathematics. When I say graph in this context, I'm not talking about graphs like you see in statistics, where we see lines trending and going up and down, or you graph a parabola, you graph an equation on your graphing calculator. No, in this case, when we're dealing with graph theory, what we mean by graph is a picture like you see over here on the right. Graphs are made of two different kinds of components. There are vertices and edges. So a vertex, plural vertices, or a node, you see those are circles labeled A, B, C, D in this case, and so on. You can label them whatever you want. And an edge is simply a line drawn between two of them. So edges can be directed or undirected. Directed edges have an arrow, undirected, no arrow. So if we look over in this example over here on the right, there is an edge from A to C. It's directed. It's not one from C to A. There is an undirected edge between A and E and A and B. There is no edge between A and G, and so on. Now, this really simple concept actually has thousands of real-world applications. I'm an engineer by profession, and I've worked with companies that used graph theory in some ways, like planning networks and network activity. We had engineering problems like that. And there are mathematical ways of applying equations and optimization to say, okay, if we say like a city is planning to, run streets here and there, it costs this much for concrete. How do we minimize the cost and make sure all of these things are connected? So on. So thousands of real world applications. There is, however, just one last thing I want to say about graph theory, and that is in a graph, it essentially doesn't matter which way you orientate the graph. So on this slide, we see 4 different graphs, or at least appears that way, but mathematically speaking, these are all considered the same graph. Some have the edges crossing over each other in places. Some of them have this node in this corner or that node in the other corner. But again, the set of all nodes and how they connect are still the same. And it goes back to the edge list, which is down on the bottom right here. The bottom line is that all of them, no matter how they're stretched and repositioned, you still have a connection from A to B. You have a directed connection from A to C, and then a connection A to E, and so on. So you have these 9 edges defined by how they connect between those nodes. So that's all that I had to say about graph theory, but this particular point about different ways to draw the same graph is going to be important as we take a look at maze. Now that I've explained those basic concepts of graph theory and how they apply to games like Zork, you might think, okay, let's go do the same with maze. Well, not so fast. Those of us who have tried doing this on paper, or maybe even not used paper, used like some kind of fancy software or whatever, well, we've learned it can get kind of messy fast because you have 45 rooms, and if you count all the doors in all the rooms that can go to another room, you get 139, I believe, doorways. So yeah, trying to connect all of those in the special way, that can get messy pretty fast. And if we have a map that we can't really read, well, it's not really of much use. And there's also the question of how can you reposition all those 45 vertices to go look good, minimize where the lines cross, maybe curve some lines and others. Trying to do that for 45 nodes by hand, that can get messy again. Now, another point I want to mention is that we don't know what map layout, if any, that the author may have had in mind when he designed the maze. He may have mapped it out in some of the ways that we'll take a look at. He may have mapped it out in a completely different way. May have even been a completely non-visual way. And any good map we might get from that, well, that just might be coincidental. Maybe he wrote out a list and then wrote the numbers for what to go to the what and then built the rooms around it. I don't know. So is that it? Do we give up now? No. I would say one thing we can do is at least map parts of maze. And I did this myself in a couple of the previous commentaries I did. If you look at commentaries number 20 or 21, here on the right is an example from 21. This is a little map I made in that same kind of style of the rooms from 45. And again, it's not complete, but it is, a fraction of the rooms that we have in maze and shows how they all interact. Now, another suggestion on ways we can break this up is why not do separate maps for the different room types? If you remember, there are 3 different room types in maze, and I've talked about these in some prior commentaries. First talked about it back in commentary number 4. You have path rooms, loop rooms, and trap rooms. Pretty quickly, path rooms are the rooms for which there exists a direct route to room 1 or to room 45. And if you, in that direct route to go to 45, you don't have to go back to 1 to retrace. Loop rooms, on the other hand, have a path back to 1, but they have no direct path to 45 unless you go all the way back to 1, and then you're in a path room. And then finally, we have trap rooms. Trap rooms have no way to get out to room 1 or to get to room 45. All the exits from trap room just lead to another trap room. And let's start with trap rooms, because there are only 7 trap rooms in Maze. And like I said, the exits from a trap room only lead to another trap room. So you can make what is kind of called a closed circuit, if you will. These rooms that all connect to each other and don't connect to any of the other ones. There is only one-way exit that we have, and that is in room 11. If you take the door to 24, that's the dead end. There is no way back out. But everything else is a two-way exit. If you're in 22, you see a door to 38. You go to 38, there's a door back to 22. On the right, here is an example of a graph, a map of the trap rooms. But again, this is just one way of doing it, because we can stretch these in all other sorts of ways. Now, is there a way we can lay out that same graph so it looks kind of pretty, maybe some kind of symmetry, or not having things cross over, and so on? Well, one thing you can do is rearrange that same graph, those same nodes and edges, in this shape over to the right. It's okay that the edges are curved in some way because it's still an edge. It still connects those particular rooms. And hey, that looks kind of like the shape of a skeleton key, namely that key that is in the illustration that is near the front of the book. Interesting. Well, we were told in the directions anything in this book could be a clue. Now, I'm certainly not the first person by far to come up with this look. I mean, at some point when I was mapping things on my own in pencil, I'm sure I came up with, okay, this is a whole self-contained graph, but didn't really make the connection with the key shape. If you go to IntoTheAbyss.net, and we'll be talking more about them, the site that I have referenced many times, they have this same kind of mapping that they propose for the trap rooms, this key shape. Before we continue, I just want to say a little bit about room 1. So in room 1, you have all these scraps of paper with all these weird symbols and stuff on them, and I still have not really found out what they mean. I mean, there are a couple of things hidden in there. I've talked about that in some clips, but in general, I don't know if they're just supposed to be random drawings, but I wonder if they are attempts at making maps of Maze. Because you do have an easel here in room 1, and as you go back to room 1, sorry, I keep saying route 1 because of the highway near where I grew up. Go back to room 1, you are going back to the drawing board, as the idiom would say. So I've wondered about this as, maybe these are different maps of different types of rooms. Like over here in this section I've blown up on the left here, you have this kind of V shape, the 3 things connected. That looks like those 3 rooms are connected. You have this square with the thing in the center, nothing connected anywhere else. Is that kind of like room 24 with no exits? And you have this other thing with many exits drawn. Is that kind of like room 4 with that? And for that matter, as I was playing around with the shape of the trap room and other shapes I could get, I thought, like this over here on the right, that kind of looks like that symbol I saw on the easel there. I mean, it's not perfect. We have that line, that horizontal line that I have between 43 and 22. Anyway, I kind of side with the key shape thing. I guess it's just more appealing in that way. But just something I wanted to mention. All right, we talked about the trap rooms, and now let's get into the path and the loop rooms. Well, like I said on IntoTheAbyss.net, they have maps for each of those sets of rooms. And I think I have some praises and I have some criticisms of them. The pros, first and foremost, they work as maps. They're pretty easy to read. You can see what room goes to what, get an idea of things. They seem aesthetically appealing. They're laid out in a kind of symmetric way, kind of easy to read. They will indicate exits to the other types of rooms too. So if we look here on the right, this is their map for the path rooms, and we see little side arrows showing, okay, this is a one-way door to this room of the loop or this room of the trap, and so on. Now, some criticisms I have. Well, first of all, there are one or two mistakes in them. I forget exactly where, but I've run across things where I was like, okay, this says it goes to this loop room, but it's actually this other loop room. This number was a little wrong here. And, of course, just by the nature of this, one con about this is it's restricted to rooms of one type. So the path room, the loop rooms, and the trap rooms, the maps for all those are each self-contained in those other types. But again, like I said, if you tried combining all 45, you'd probably get something really messy. Now, as I said over and over again, there are multiple ways to draw the same graph. I've seen other fans of Maze comment on this map that is on Into the Abyss with the path, and they say, oh, look how beautiful it is. The author, Christopher Manson, obviously designed the path to look like an infinity symbol. And to that I say, no, not necessarily. First of all, we got some of these edges crossing on that. And another thing is we were told 45 is at the center of the maze. Well, then why is it way in the upper right corner? So again, the point is that there is no one definitive right way to draw a math graph, and likewise with the maps here. There may be more than one way to do it. Now, as for the other types of rooms, like I said, with the trap, they came up with a key shape that was pretty much like what you saw earlier, a couple slides back. The loop, this is the map that they came up for the loop rooms. Again, same pros and cons, I would say, with the other ones. It is kind of symmetrical, aesthetically appealing, shows you where to go to the other rooms. But as functional as it may be, it's not the only way to do it. So with that, I would like to propose my own map that I've been working on. So I've made this for free on a website, graphontline.top. If you go there, you get this like canvas, and you can click on it to add nodes, and then click on different nodes to add edges in between them. And then you can click and drag and drop to reposition them anywhere on the page and add little curves to the lines and so on. So first of all, I know people are going to say, oh, Bill, you should have used AutoCAD, or you should have used this program, or hey, I'm looking at this on YouTube and it's kind of pixelated and you should use, I get it. This is just a draft that I made with a free tool. But in my defense, this map here shows the loop and the trap rooms. If you look at the bottom half there in that shaded area, those are the trap rooms. And the rest here are all the loop rooms. And to exit the loop, I'll talk about this in a future clip. You make your way out to 41, and then at 41, there's a door there to 1, and you go out that way. Now, that would lead to the path rooms, and the path rooms would, in theory, fit in this blank center. But again, trying to draw all the edges from the path rooms out to the loop rooms and the trap rooms that they correspond with, that they connect to, could get messy, so I haven't attempted that. But hey, this is a start, and again, includes both the loop rooms and the trap rooms. It shows how they connect. So, of course, this begs the question, Bill, did you make a map for the path rooms? Did you do something maybe superior to what they have on IntoTheAbyss.net? Well, I started a draft, and I know people will see that and say, "Oh my God, that looks so ugly with the way the lines are and everything, and it doesn't look like the beautiful infinity symbol." So, Bill, you're obviously wrong. Hold on, hear me out. I'm still working on this, and I've been mapping the path rooms. And like I said, the Into the Abyss maps, they're nice and practical, but not the only way to map the rooms. And in this case, I said, okay, well, 45 is the center of the maze. Let me at least put that in the center. And when I did that and started putting the other rooms around, I realized it's kind of spiraling around into 45 in this sort of way. So this is my hunch, and it's just a pure conjecture right now. My hunch is that when Christopher Manson was designing this part of maze, he did not design it as an infinity symbol shape, but as more of a labyrinth shape, like you see the picture here in the bottom right. So going in and kind of circling around until you get to the center and then circling back. Now, labyrinths have like a one-way direction pretty much. Sometimes you can split things up and, you have more of a maze in that sense. So it's not quite a labyrinth. You do have one-way exits and so on that you got to put in there. But again, this whole thing in theory could fit in with the other mappings. And we don't know, though. Again, we don't know if Christopher Manson even had a visual thing in mind. So again, I can't stress this enough. This is still a work in progress. Still something I'm playing around with. But that's all I have for now. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next Maze commentary.